Hi, Franklin. This is Ira. I'm recording here my voice feedback on your conference paper with an eye to thinking about how to move it from one genre of writing, i.e., conference paper, to another, i.e., journal article. So, really central to my feedback here is not really assessment of the conference paper as a conference paper, but rather a series of questions or thoughts that I hope will be useful as you're moving it into its next form, into the article form. And so central there, right off the bat, like we talked about in class with this workflow, this flow chart I developed, central there is deciding how and where exactly you're making a contribution to the scholarly literature. So I hope you'll find my comments or feedback useful. Basically, what I'm going to do is just scroll through the paper and offer a few thoughts on different aspects of the paper as written, with that eye to how to help it make sure that it contributes effectively in its disciplinary matrix. Cool. So it's nice, you start off with this historical moment and, have this sort of delightful, sarcastic open letter. You probably want to be a little careful because, obviously it's delightfully sarcastic, but also hugely jerkish. And you can convey that in person when you give a conference paper, but you want to be really careful with your wording for text that you're not personally delivering, because your own disapprobation of Pixton doesn't come across quite as clearly in writing as it does in your delivery of the lines. So just kind of a heads up about that. Kind of want to think about that. But at any rate, I think it's a nice, sort of anecdote to begin with to help us see right off the bat where the resolution comes from and why it doesn't do quite as much as we hope it would, i.e., it doesn't necessarily move from being non-racist to anti-racist. So I think that's a useful kind of anecdote for setting us up there. What I would want to see there, though, before you really even go further or much further into that tendency, or at least, sort of by the middle of the second page, I'd like to see you, on the one hand, articulating pretty clearly the basic argument that's going to run through the whole essay, through the whole article. So we want to have a fairly clear sense up front of what is the guiding argument, the thesis, etc. The other thing I'd like to see you moving to is to situate your response to this in the history of responses to this. So there have been a lot of responses to the resolution over time. You don't have to trace out that whole history, but it's definitely been a subject regarding which there's a ton of discussion in recent years, and in fact right now. So you might look, like I mentioned in class, look at Google Compile, Google WPA-L listserv archives, and you can see this long set of responses to the call for papers for next year's 4Cs conference. And so that call for papers is, I think, in some ways trying to be anti-racist, and some of the responses to it are challenging it on the grounds that it's not effectively being anti-racist. Some of the responses to it are probably quote-unquote non-racist in the sense that you're critical of here. They don't really they don't have a way of attuning to anti-racist concerns and considerations. Anyways, there's a huge range of responses. It's definitely worth going through those because it gives you a way of situating the article in a current discussion, especially if you end up deciding to send the article to a more properly composition studies journal. You definitely want to be looking at that particular rhetorical ecology. But regardless of whether you're really doing a lot with that one, I do want to see you here in the early days of the article, so to speak, in the early pages of the essay, not just to move, and this is fine for a conference paper, by the way. This is not a critique of the conference paper. Rather, it's suggestions for how to move from conference paper to journal article. So I want to see you not move quite so quickly to thinking about what it means to truly value and respect students' languages and how we fail to do that and so on and so forth, but rather get a sense of what is the doxa today, not just about respecting or valuing or honoring students' languages, although also that, but about the resolution itself. If that's your kind of guiding sort of organizing object of study in some ways, what are other people saying about it right now? Other scholars? How is the resolution, or is it failing to guide our specific thinking? So I want to see you really looking at how this object of study is specifically guiding our scholarship today. That's that, I think, and that's the specific thing I'd like to see here. Regardless of whether you really pursue that very deeply, what you definitely need to be doing, at the very least, is moving here to situate the position that you're going to take in the context of the scholarship in not just the journal that you're submitting to, but the field or subfield that journal represents. So in other words, what would readers of this journal be also reading in this journal or in other journals that's related doxastically, that's related at the level of common sense or shared beliefs or etc., to the argument that you're making? What is the common wisdom right now, and how are you extending or amending or challenging or rejecting some piece of current common wisdom with regard to the resolution? And I think when you do that, that's going to help you talk a little more clearly about one of the things that's a really interesting strand of your paper, which is this difference between, respecting and honoring, which is not to be too overly schematic about it, but I see that here as loosely related to the difference between non-racist and anti-racist, that respecting students' right to their own language is maybe non-racist, but honoring students' language aligns more closely with the anti-racist. So with all that in mind, it would also be helpful to have more of a sense of what anti-racist assessment ecologies or anti-racist pedagogies are, how they function, how they fit in with the scholarly conversation that you are contributing to, and to have that sense really fairly up front, since that's going to be one of the guiding ideas. You don't have to do the whole shebang up front. You can lay that out later as you go along, but we want to have a little more of a sense of that up front. One of the things that I think you do pretty effectively is move between ideas from one paragraph to the next, and I encourage you to keep doing that effectively. So for instance, you say, you essentially give us the take home from read, and then you bring us to say, to ask, well, is read necessarily going far enough? No, she's not. Here's how we need something more. One of the things you're going to need to do as you move from conference paper to article is you're going to need to tease out more fully and carefully the details of those transitions. So they're good transitions for a conference paper, but for an article, they're a little swift. They pass over a whole bunch of argument. That's fine because you only have 20 minutes to deliver the conference paper, but that needs to be teased out more carefully and fully articulated and unpacked, etc., in the journal article, in the article length piece. And this is a good example of a moment where that transition is working well for the conference paper, and it's going to need to be deepened with respect to, going back up, your central argument, your organizing idea. And if you see that as something you should be doing it basically, if not many transition points, then that process will help you write the article in a way that keeps the through line right throughout. Another thing you may want to think about, and this is, you should get this out of what I mentioned with bringing anti-racist, the concept of anti-racist assessment or anti-racist pedagogy up earlier, you might want to reorganize the structure a little bit to make sure that you're able to deliver upfront the core idea fairly fully, and so that we have enough of the core idea to be able to track it carefully in each of the different moments that you discuss, whether that's in Red or it's in Jordan or whatever. To that end, I'd encourage you to bring up some of this stuff from Masao Inoue up to basically the front, elaborate on it about as much as you have up front, and then come back to tie Inoue together closely with Atwell a little bit later. So give us a little bit of Inoue, a little bit of Atwell, both up front. Then bring us a little bit deeper into the scholarly conversation. Then come back later on and trace them out separately, but also do that work of tying them back together. I think one of the cool contributions of your work here is the way that you're drawing from the one hand with Inoue from composition studies, and on the other hand with Atwell from education, and you're bringing those two perspectives together and building a new frame for thinking about the very interpersonal ways in which anti-racist pedagogy can function, and I think that's very cool. So I want to see a little bit more of how that story cashes out right from the start. And then I'd like to see a little more of that intertwining happening along the way. And I think some of this is going to that will be easier when you've laid out a fuller version of the contemporary doxa that you're interceding in, so that we, right from the start, or relatively from the start, in the first 4, 5, 6 pages, we have a pretty clear sense of what is the field-specific or interfield conversation that already exists that you're contributing to, and how does your contribution change that conversation in some way? Maybe it extends one part of the conversation. There's one point, one set of points that you think is particularly strong, and you mean to forward that set of points with new arguments. Maybe it amends part of that. There's a set of points that are good, that are useful, and this, by the way, I think is your kind of how you take Red and Jordan. Good, useful, but don't go far enough. And what you're doing is helping us go further, etc. All the stuff we talked about in class. But I'd like to see you doing that positioning of your own argument a little more fully early on, because that's going to let you along the way treat each new moment of discussion, whether that's of Inoue or Atwell or the ties between the two or your own classroom or whatever, but each new moment of discussion as something that sheds further light on an argument you've already kind of let us know you'll be making, and then helps us see along the way how that argument you're making does indeed advance the conversations in the ways that you've told us it will. So with that in mind, you want to also then be able to make sure along the way that you touch, you check back in on the resolution and on the scholarly reception of the resolution. So those right now get lost a little bit in the essay. It's just sort of a framing concern up front. Come back to it a little bit, but not really a lot, which is, again, that's fine. For a conference paper, you can only do so much. But for an article, we want to make sure that that frame narrative doesn't get lost at the end. If we've got a frame in the beginning, we want to have that same frame throughout the essay. And I think, that non-racist, anti-racist binary that's part of your reading of the resolution, I think might be a good way of coming at that. It might be a good through line to pursue throughout the essay. So those are my kind of general thoughts. I can only give you 15-minute feedback, so we've got about 10 seconds to say, I hope these are useful. And I really strongly encourage you, make an appointment. Come see me. I'd love to talk with you more about this as you finish writing the paper, and I look forward to reading it. Thanks.